Superman Year One, written by Frank Miller, art by John Romita Jr. So I was on vacation in the last few weeks, but I'm back now, and I really wanted to cover this book and share my thoughts with it because this is such a big comic, so much history behind this series. So Superman Year One is tying into Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns universe, which spans a few books now. So back in 1986, we had The Dark Knight Returns, one of the most iconic Batman stories. If you read Batman comics, almost everybody owns this graphic novel, covering Batman at the end of his career, sort of retired, and that epic fight with Superman. It's even covered in Zack Snyder's Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice movie. So, such a big comic, very beloved comic. Frank Miller followed that up with Batman Year One, which is actually canon, and people still sort of see it as the pivotal Batman sort of origin story. Very beloved comic. Frank Miller in the 80s was on fire, top of his game, right? But, there's been a lot of time has passed since then, and Frank Miller followed those books up with, in 2001, a book called The Dark Knight Strikes Again, which was a sequel to The Dark Knight Returns, and most people did not like that series. Then he did another series called All-Star Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder, around 2005, 2008. And a lot of people did not like that series either. It was also in the same Dark Knight Returns continuity. People didn't like it because Bruce Wayne was treating Dick Grayson Robin as shit, and he was making him eat rats, and it was fucking crazy. And also, Batman kept referring to himself as the goddamn Batman, and it kind of became a meme. And most people did not really love that series. And then he followed that up with another sequel called The Dark Knight 3, The Master Race, in 2015. And he co-wrote that with Brian Azzarello. And most people didn't really like that series either. So Frank Miller is kind of like this guy where, he was so popular back in the day. People are always very curious to check out what he's going to write. But he doesn't carry that same prestige he once did. He's like Bob Dylan in the 60s and 70s. So great, everyone loves Dylan, but Dylan's still performing today in 2019, and most people are not that impressed with his live performances nowadays, and that is Frank Miller in a nutshell. And Superman Year One is sort of Frank Miller's version of Superman and doing that origin story, and it's tying it to his continuity. And this Superman is supposed to be the Superman that we've seen in Dark Knight Returns, so it's a little different Superman. It's a little bit more militaristic. So I don't know if we need another Superman origin story, but let's dive into the story in this issue, and then I will give you my thoughts on Frank Miller's Superman Year One. So when this book opens up, we are starting in Krypton, and it is destructing, and Superman's parents put him on the rocket and they send him to Earth. The point of view of this part of the story is actually from Superman's perspective, so it's very interesting, him as an infant sort of seeing this whole all go down within his eyes, and then when he's on Earth, one thing interesting is that baby Superman opens the rocket he is in by himself and is sort of standing there, and it's sort of interesting here that him as a baby being so sort of present, But the Kents, of course, adopt him, and they think he's special. We see Clark Kent jumping super high, and eventually he can fly, and he's growing up. He's playing baseball with his dad, but he sort of holds back because he doesn't want to throw the baseball, all the way. He doesn't want to accidentally kill his dad, right? At one point, the baseball rolls under a truck, and Clark Kent lifts the truck and grabs the baseball, sort of showcasing, his strength he has as Superman. So Clark Kent is now in high school, and he's friends with these nerds called the Weirdos. And his nerds are kind of cliche. There is the fat kid, and there's the goth kid, which we're going to meet later. But anyway, the fat kid in science class, they're all wearing these little astronaut helmets, and the fat kid can't fit it on, and Kent manages to sort of bend the helmet and make it fit. And this sort of gets the whole school sort of whispering about Clark. Clark is trying to tell, these nerd friends of his to combat these bullies. Why don't you use your smarts, use jokes to combat them? But this advice doesn't really help the nerds out that much. They continue to get made fun of, even with Clark sort of protecting them at times. Clark is back at home, and he's talking to his parents, and he's like, what should I do? Do I talk to these bullies? Do I flatten them? John Kent says, first talk to them, then flatten. And Ma Kent says, best you don't resort to violence. So Clark is conflicted here. He could easily destroy these kids, but he obviously needs to show some restraint. The next morning, Clark's nerd friends get egged by the bullies on their way to school. So Clark decides to sort of confront these bullies, and he fights them all. He holds back a little bit, but he still manages to injure one of the bullies, and he gets in trouble for it, and he gets suspended for 10 days. Back at home, Clark is talking to his parents, and Ma Kent continues to insist on not being violent, and Pa Kent says, you gotta take the high road, and maybe you'll get yourself taken advantage of a little bit now and then, but you're nobody's doormat. You're something this old world's never seen before, and you're gonna change it just by being here, so change it for the better. And Clark is sort of absorbing this information in sort of the philosophical kind of way his dad is sort of saying he should act. Back at school now, the nerds continue to get picked on. It's somehow worse than before. And Lana Lang, which is Clark Kent's high school love interest, she sees Clark on the bus, and she says she has pictures of these bullies. She has evidence, of their misdeeds, and if they go to the police, perhaps they can stop these bullies from beating up these nerds, right? She tells Clark to come to her house later on that night to go over the evidence she collected. The bullies hear this, though, and they show up at Lana's place before Clark does, and they take this evidence that she has, and then they try to rape Lana Lang, basically. They say, we're done with business, now it's time for pleasure. Which I felt this was a little bit of an unnecessary detour in this story. It's like typical Frank Miller throwing in some rape stuff into his story. But nevertheless, this does not escalate that far, because Clark does show up, he arrives, he beats these bullies up, he saves Lana, and he flies away with her. And thus he reveals his superpowers to her, that, he has the power of flight, and he's super strong and whatnot. And, they have enough evidence to sort of stop this bully problem at school, and then we don't really hear much more about these bullies after this. So Clark and Lana, they start spending a lot more time together. They start falling in love. They're studying together. We see Clark reading books super quickly at the library, so sort of showcasing his super intelligence and, how quickly he can absorb information. They go to picnics together. Clark talks about his plans for the future and what he's going to do after school. He says, I'm going to do what Pa said. He told me to travel all over. Know your planet, boy. And that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to do great deeds. So, kind of interesting seeing sort of Clark develop his sort of plan for the future. Clark and Lana, they meet each other's parents. They watch fireworks and they kiss. And, they continue to sort of have this high school romance. We see Clark is on the football team, and this is one game where they're losing. Now, normally when you have Superman's origin story, he's always sort of holding back during these football games. He doesn't want to showcase his abilities too much, and I guess that's sort of the case in this story, but for this one particular game, Clark just wanted to sort of have some fun and sort of go all out. So even though this team is losing, he decides that he's going to win this game. He intercepts a pass. He's running through everybody on the field. 4 kids are trying to tackle and bring him down. But Clark manages to run through them all, get a touchdown, win the game. Everyone's excited. Everyone's celebrating. Although Pa Kent is in the stands, and he has a disappointed look on his face. He feels that Clark was showing off here. He was showboating, and he didn't really dig that. Back at the farm, Pa Kent and Clark are having sort of a moment. They're talking, and Clark announces that he's going to join the Navy and see the world, get to know his planet like Pa Kent said. Pa Kent is a little bit disappointed in this because he thought Clark would go to college, and he knows that Ma Kent is not going to be for this entirely. But, they accept it. They break the news to Ma Kent, and they sort of accept Clark's decision to join the Navy. And this is sort of a big change with Frank Miller's version of Superman's origin story. I have to say, it does kind of make sense in the context of this story. I could see Clark Kent wanting to join the Navy, although as a Superman traditionalist, I don't know if I'm fully on board with this change. We'll have to see where it pans out in future issues. So Clark then breaks this news to Lana Lang as well, that he's going to be leaving, he's going to be joining the Navy. They kiss goodbye. They say they're gonna wait for each other, and Clark is then on the bus to the Navy, and he's looking back at Lana's house with his supervision, and Lana knows that Clark is perhaps going to be looking at her house, so she's holding up a sign for Clark saying, "I love you and I'll miss you." And I thought the story had some really good Clark and Lana Lang moments, which I did like. The issue ends with Clark Kent arriving at the training academy for the Navy, and he is super excited for it. So overall, what did I think of this story? I thought the artwork was really good. I liked the Clark-Lana Lang relationship stuff. I liked the Clark and the moments he had with his dad. I thought they did a really good job with that. However, I feel like there's really not that much different here from other Superman origin stories I've read over the years, and there's been dozens of them, and there's not really enough different in this story, or it's not done to a level that just makes it a must read or anything. I also did not really love the Lana Lang rape potential stuff. I thought the bullies and the nerd characters were super cliche. I felt that Superman joining the Navy is not something I'm fully on board with. Although, this Superman is supposed to be part of the Dark Knight Returns universe, so maybe it'll work with that. Overall, I just don't think there's really enough different and new here to really make it a must read, but it's certainly an interesting read to see what Frank Miller is going to do with this Superman story. It definitely wasn't as dark as I expected. I was really thought Frank was going to try to go really gritty, and I'm glad he did not go as far to that side as I was thinking he might have. But I'm going to give this opening issue a 6.5 out of 10. Didn't hate it, didn't love it. Definitely going to read the whole thing, but I'm kind of mixed on it.